It began as an ordinary day at one of the busiest airports in the world. Travelers rushed through security lines, flight announcements echoed through the terminal, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the hum of activity. But behind the scenes, a storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundation of trust people placed in the system. As passengers shuffled through the gates, unknowingly crossing paths with the story that was about to unfold, one man stood out. Officer Daniel Reyes, a senior airport official known for his sharp wit and spotless record, was the kind of person others trusted implicitly. Whether it was helping a lost traveler or ensuring flights ran on time, Daniel was always in control. But today, there was something different about him. His usual calm demeanor seemed frayed at the edges, his eyes darting nervously as though he were anticipating a storm no one else could see. Meanwhile, in another part of the airport, an unnoticed passenger was quietly observing. Maria Lopez, an investigative journalist known for her knack for uncovering secrets, had received an anonymous tip a week earlier. The email had been vague but chilling, hinting at corruption, smuggling, and a betrayal of public trust. And all the clues pointed straight to this airport. Maria didn't know exactly what she was looking for yet, but she had learned to trust her instincts. Something was off, and she was determined to find out what it was. As Maria moved through the terminal, her eyes scanned every detail: the hurried steps of the crew, the way security officers spoke into their radios, and the subtle glances exchanged between staff members. Her heart raced as she felt the weight of what might be at stake. What if the tip was real? And what if the person behind it all was someone in a position of power? At the same time, Daniel found himself pulled into an unexpected situation. A package, seemingly routine, had arrived in the secure area of the airport. Its paperwork was flawless, stamped and signed in all the right places. But when Daniel's junior officer raised a question about its unusually high insurance value, Daniel brushed it off. "Just follow protocol," he said, his voice steady but his palms beginning to sweat. The day continued as though nothing was wrong, but Maria's investigation was gaining traction. A casual conversation with a baggage handler revealed whispers of the regular shipments and unexplained overtime hours for certain staff. Every new detail added a piece to the puzzle, and Maria's gut told her she was on the verge of something big. As night fell and the terminal lights dimmed, Maria found herself in a restricted area, using her press credentials to get closer to the truth. She didn't realize it yet, but her path was about to collide directly with Daniel's, and the consequences would be far greater than either of them could imagine. Just as Maria reached a locked door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," she heard voices on the other side. Pressing her ear against the cool metal, she caught fragments of a conversation that sent shivers down her spine. Words like shipment, clearance, and tonight hinted at something far from routine. But it wasn't until she heard Daniel's voice that her heart dropped. "Everything is set. Make sure it goes through without a hitch," he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. Could it really be him, the man everyone trusted? The same man she had observed earlier, commanding respect and exuding confidence. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but they painted a picture more disturbing than she had imagined. Before she could process what to do next, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway behind her. Startled, Maria turned to see a shadow moving closer. Her heart raced as she realized she was moments away from being discovered. And if Daniel was involved in something criminal, what would he do to protect his secret? The tension is palpable, and the stakes have never been higher. What exactly is Daniel hiding? Will Maria uncover the truth before it's too late? Or has she walked into a trap that could cost her everything? Stay tuned to find out what happens next in Asterisk Part 2. Airport official Sol Huichi read, handed in shocking crimes scandal asterisk. This is a story you don't want to miss. Let me know if you'd like adjustments or more details. Maria held her breath as the footsteps grew louder, each one echoing off the cold, sterile walls of the restricted hallway. Her mind raced. She had no time to think, only to act. Spying a supply closet just a few feet away, she darted inside and carefully closed the door, leaving it open just enough to peek through the crack. A figure stepped inside, their silhouette illuminated by the hallway light. It wasn't Daniel, but someone she didn't recognize, a man in a maintenance uniform. He looked around briefly before muttering to himself and leaving, the door clicking shut behind him. Maria waited a few moments to make sure the coast was clear before slipping out of the office. She had what she needed for now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Back in the restricted area, Daniel was finalizing the plans for the evening. His phone buzzed with a message. **** Kel set. Shipment cleared for departure at midnight. ***. He exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation momentarily lifting. But his relief was short-lived. As he pocketed his phone, Harris spoke up again, his voice tinged with doubt. "Do you ever think about what happens if we get caught?" Daniel shot him a sharp look. "We won't. Just stick to the plan." But even as he said the words, a knot of unease twisted in his stomach. For the first time, he began to wonder if the walls were closing in faster than he realized. As midnight approached, the airport buzzed with activity, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Maria positioned herself near the loading docks, her phone ready to capture whatever unfolded next. She didn't know exactly what she was about to witness, but one thing was certain: the truth was closer than ever, and there was no turning back now. What would happen when Daniel's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled? And how far would he go to protect his secret? The answers lay just beyond the next turn, shrouded in a tension that refused to let go. Would you like me to continue from here or refine any part of this section? Maria crouched behind a stack of crates near the loading dock, her breathing shallow as she adjusted the angle of her phone camera. The area was dimly lit, with just enough flickering light from overhead fixtures to create long, moving shadows. Workers moved back and forth, unloading and loading various packages, their faces neutral, their actions practiced. To the untrained eye, it all looked routine, just another night at a busy international airport. But Maria had learned to read between the lines, and the tension in the air was palpable. She spotted Daniel near the far side of the dock, clipboard in hand, barking quiet orders to a small group of staff. He was meticulous, scanning each package as though his life depended on it. In a way, Maria thought, maybe it did. One of the crates stood out. Unlike the others, which were marked with clear labels and codes, this one was almost entirely unmarked, except for a small symbol in the corner. A symbol Maria didn't recognize but instinctively knew wasn't standard. Her fingers itched to grab her phone and zoom in, but she couldn't risk being seen. She'd already pushed her luck by getting this far. Meanwhile, in the airport's central hub, Harris was pacing nervously near a coffee kiosk. He had been ordered to stay out of sight, but his conscience wouldn't let him rest. He couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. Every time he thought about what they were doing, what they had been doing for months, it gnawed at him. It wasn't just the fear of being caught. Harris had started working at the airport to support his family, to build a stable life. But now he was neck-deep in something that could destroy everything. Daniel's reassurances no longer felt convincing, and Harris couldn't stop replaying the words of one of the baggage handlers earlier that day. "You better watch yourself, man. People like that, they'll throw you under the bus the second things go south." The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He glanced at his phone, tempted to call someone, anyone, who could help. But who could he trust? Back at the dock, Maria's patience paid off when she noticed a familiar face approaching Daniel. It was a man she'd seen earlier, wearing the same maintenance uniform as the person who had nearly caught her in the operations office. He handed Daniel a tablet, and the two of them exchanged a few quiet words before Daniel signed something on the screen. Maria's gut told her this wasn't just routine paperwork. She inched closer, her phone recording every move. But before she could get a better look, a loud clatter startled her, and she froze. A worker had dropped a metal tool nearby, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. Daniel's head snapped in the direction of the noise, his sharp eyes scanning the area. Maria ducked lower, pressing herself against the crates, her heart pounding in her ears. For a few agonizing moments, she thought she'd been spotted. Daniel took a step toward her direction, his expression tense. But then one of the staff called out to him about a loading issue, and he turned back. Maria exhaled slowly, her pulse still racing. As she steadied herself, she couldn't help but wonder how far Daniel's operation extended. Was it just a few shipments here and there? Or was it something much bigger? The unmarked crate, the strange symbol, the way Daniel carried himself, it all pointed to something far more organized than she had initially suspected. Elsewhere in the terminal, Alex, Maria's editor, was growing increasingly anxious. He had tried calling Maria several times with no response. He knew she had a habit of diving headfirst into risky situations, but this time felt different. The stakes were higher, and he had a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. "Come on, Maria," he muttered under his breath, staring at his phone screen. He considered calling the airport's main office to check on her, but knew that could blow her cover. Instead, he texted again. ***, whatever you're doing, don't forget to be smart. Don't take unnecessary risks. ***. But Maria didn't see the message. She was too busy following her instincts, edging closer to the truth. As the workers loaded the mysterious crate onto a conveyor belt, Maria made a bold decision. She moved around the edge of the dock, staying in the shadows, and positioned herself near the exit where the crate was being wheeled out. Daniel's voice carried across the dock, sharp and commanding. "Make sure this shipment doesn't get delayed. We're already cutting it close." Maria's heart sank as she realized the shipment was leaving the airport tonight. If she didn't act fast, she'd lose her chance to uncover what was inside or where it was going. But how could she get close enough without being seen? The tension in the air thickened as Daniel checked his watch, his movements growing more agitated. Whatever was happening, it was clear time was running out for him, for the shipment, and for Maria's investigation. As the crate disappeared through the exit, Maria made a split-second decision. She slipped through a side door, following the path of the conveyor belt. The hallway was eerily quiet, the only sound the low hum of machinery. Maria stayed close to the wall, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Up ahead, she saw the crate being loaded onto a small transport vehicle. Two men stood nearby, one of them holding a clipboard, the other watching the process with a practiced eye. Maria crouched behind a stack of pallets, her phone's camera zoomed in, capturing every detail. Her heart raced as the men exchanged a few words before climbing into the vehicle and driving off. Maria knew she had to follow, but doing so would mean leaving the relative safety of the shadows. It was a risk she wasn't sure she could afford to take, but her instincts told her this was the moment she'd been waiting for. As she hesitated, she heard a noise behind her, a faint shuffle of footsteps. She turned quickly, her pulse spiking, but saw nothing. The hallway was empty, or so it seemed. A cold knot of dread settled in her stomach. Someone was watching her. Maria pressed herself against the wall, her eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor. She had no way of knowing if it was one of Daniel's men or just an unsuspecting worker, but she couldn't take any chances. The stakes were higher than ever, and Maria realized she was no longer just chasing a story. She was in the middle of something much bigger and much more dangerous than she had anticipated. What she didn't know was that Daniel had started to suspect something was off. His carefully crafted plan was running smoothly, but his gut told him there was a variable he hadn't accounted for. And in his world, variables were dangerous. Maria's every move was bringing her closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. With the shipment on its way and the clock ticking, the question wasn't just whether she could uncover the full scope of the operation. It was whether she could do so without becoming its next casualty. "Would you like me to continue from here?" Maria's pulse hammered in her ears as she pressed her back against the wall, her phone trembling slightly in her grip. The faint footsteps behind her had stopped, but the silence felt heavier now, almost suffocating. She could feel the weight of every choice she'd made leading to this moment. Turning back wasn't an option, not anymore. Ahead, the small transport vehicle carrying the mysterious crate slowed near a cargo elevator. Maria took a deep breath and darted forward, keeping low and using the shadows to mask her movement. She crouched behind a pillar just as the vehicle came to a halt. The two men who had loaded the crate stepped out, one of them swiping an access card to call the elevator. The metallic clang of the doors opening echoed through the space, amplifying Maria's unease. As the men wheeled the crate inside, they exchanged a hushed conversation. "You think Reyes has everything under control?" one of them asked, his tone laced with doubt. The other man grunted. "He better. This one's too big to mess up. If we get flagged..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the tension in his voice said enough. Maria's fingers hovered over her phone's screen, recording every word. The mention of Daniel confirmed her suspicions, but it also raised more questions. What was inside that crate that had everyone so on edge? And who else was involved in this operation? The elevator doors began to close, and Maria's heart leaped. If she didn't act now, she'd lose her chance to follow the shipment. She slipped out from behind the pillar and sprinted silently toward the elevator, catching the doors just before they shut. Sliding into the small space between the elevator and the wall, she wedged herself in, staying out of sight as the lift began its descent. The ride felt endless. The hum of the machinery filled the silence, each second stretching out painfully. Maria strained to hear the men's conversation, but their voices had dropped to whispers. She could only catch fragments. Transfer point, midnight deadline, next phase. When the elevator finally came to a stop, Maria held her breath. The men wheeled the crate out into a cavernous underground storage area. It was colder here, the air damp and heavy. Rows of unmarked containers lined the space, each one identical to the last. Maria's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about one shipment. This was part of something much larger, an entire operation hiding in plain sight beneath the airport. The men stopped near a marked zone where several more people were waiting. Daniel was among them, his presence commanding attention. He spoke quickly, his voice sharp and decisive. "We don't have much time. Get this loaded and secured. No mistakes." Maria's phone captured everything, but she knew it wasn't enough. She needed to see what was inside that crate. Carefully, she moved closer, slipping behind a stack of boxes that offered a clear view of the group. One of the workers began to open the crate, using a crowbar to pry off the lid. Maria leaned forward, her breath catching as the lid creaked open. Inside, nestled among layers of protective padding, was smaller sealed containers. They looked innocuous enough, but Daniel's reaction told another story. His eyes scanned the contents, and he nodded in satisfaction. "Everything's here," he said. "Get it on the truck. We can't afford delays." Maria's mind raced. What was in those smaller containers? Was it contraband, stolen goods, or something even more dangerous? Whatever it was clear that Daniel and his team were going to great lengths to ensure it moved without interference. As the workers began to reseal the crate, Maria knew she had to act fast. She couldn't risk losing the evidence she'd gathered, but she also couldn't let the shipment disappear without knowing more. Just as she was debating her next move, a sharp voice cut through the air. "What are you doing here?" Maria froze. She turned slowly, her heart sinking as she came face to face with Harris. His eyes widened in recognition, and for a moment, they stared at each other in stunned silence. I got lost," Maria stammered, trying to sound convincing. Harris's gaze flicked to the phone in her hand, and his expression hardened. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice low but firm. Before Maria could respond, Daniel's voice called out from behind them. "Harris, what's going on?" Maria's stomach dropped. She had seconds to decide what to do. Run? Confront them? Play innocent? Every option felt equally risky. Harris hesitated, glancing back at Daniel and then at Maria. His hand hovered near the radio on his belt, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he leaned in closer to Maria and whispered, "You need to leave. Now." His tone wasn't threatening, it was a warning. For a moment, Maria saw the conflict in his eyes, the doubt that had been eating away at him. But before she could react, Daniel's footsteps approached, each one echoing louder than the last. The climax of the night was drawing near, and Maria realized she was about to be caught in the middle of it. "Would you like me to continue building toward the climactic moment?" Maria felt her breath hitch as Daniel approached, his sharp gaze zeroing in on her and Harris. She could see the wheels turning in his mind, calculating, assessing the situation. Harris took a half step in front of her, his body language tense but protective, as if trying to shield her from the inevitable confrontation. "Who's this?" Daniel asked, his voice cold and clipped. His eyes flicked to Maria's face, then down to the phone she still gripped tightly in her hand. The faint glow from the screen betrayed her, even as she tried to angle it away. Harris started, but his voice faltered. Maria could see the sweat beading on his brow, the way his shoulders tightened. He was trapped, just like her. But unlike her, Harris knew exactly what he was up against. "She got lost," Harris finally said, his voice unconvincing. Daniel's lips curled into a tight, humorless smile. "Lost, in a restricted area, with a phone that's clearly recording." Maria's stomach dropped. She opened her mouth to respond, to come up with some sort of excuse, but the words wouldn't come. Daniel stepped closer, his presence imposing, and Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Before Daniel could press further, one of the workers called out from across the room, "We've got a problem with the truck." The distraction was brief, but it was enough. Daniel's attention shifted for a moment, and Maria seized the opportunity. She bolted, darting toward the nearest exit. Harris, caught off guard, hesitated for a split second before shouting after her, "Wait." Chaos erupted behind her as Daniel barked orders. "Don't let her get away. She knows too much." Maria's heart pounded as she sprinted through the dimly lit corridor, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand. She could hear the sound of footsteps pounding behind her, growing louder with each passing second. Her mind raced as she tried to map out an escape route, but the labyrinthine layout of the underground storage area offered little clarity. She turned a corner and spotted a narrow staircase leading up. Without thinking, she took it, her legs burning as she climbed. She could hear the shouts of her pursuers below, their voices echoing through the concrete halls. Reaching the top of the stairs, Maria burst through a door and found herself in another part of the airport's cargo area. It was quieter here, the hum of machinery and the distant chatter of workers the only sounds. She ducked behind a stack of crates, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. But she couldn't rest. Not yet. She needed to get out, to get her footage to Alex, to expose whatever was happening here before it was too late. As she peered around the edge of the crates, she saw a familiar figure step into view, Harris. He was alone, his expression conflicted as he scanned the area. When his eyes landed on her, he hesitated, then raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice low and urgent. Maria didn't move. She didn't trust him, but she also couldn't afford to make a scene. "You need to listen to me," Harris continued, stepping closer. "If you stay here, they'll find you. And if they find you, you won't walk out of here. Let me help you." Maria's instincts screamed at her to run, but something in Harris' voice stopped her. There was no malice, no threat, only fear. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Harris glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure they were alone. "Because I'm not like them," he said. "I didn't sign up for this. I don't want any part of it anymore." Before Maria could respond, a loud clang echoed from the other end of the room. Both of them froze, their eyes snapping toward the source of the noise. Daniel's voice rang out, closer now. "She's here somewhere. Find her." Harris turned back to Maria, his expression desperate. "You have to go. Now. Take the service tunnel behind those crates. It'll lead you to the tarmac. From there, you can find your way out. Maria hesitated, her mind racing. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she didn't have a choice. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and she knew her time was running out. Reluctantly, she nodded. Harris stepped aside, motioning toward the crates. "Go, I'll buy you some time." "Maria," he shouted, his voice echoing across the tarmac. She didn't stop. Ahead, she saw a small plane idling on the runway, its pilot climbing aboard. It was her only chance. As she ran, she heard footsteps closing in. She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw Daniel gaining on her, his expression dark. "You can't outrun this," he yelled. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Maria's heart pounded. She reached the plane just as the pilot turned to see her. "Please," she gasped, out of breath. "I need to get out of here." The pilot hesitated, but then the sound of gunfire shattered the night. The shots hit the ground nearby, and Maria ducked, fear gripping her. The pilot nodded quickly and motioned for her to get inside. Maria scrambled up the steps, her pulse racing. The plane's engine roared as it began to move, and she looked out the window to see Daniel standing on the tarmac, his fists clenched. As the plane lifted off, Maria felt a surge of relief. She'd made it. She had the evidence. But just as she allowed herself to breathe, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. "You think it's over. This goes deeper than you realize." Maria stared at the screen, her relief turning to dread. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the plane soared into the night sky, Maria leaned back in the small passenger seat, her hands trembling. The adrenaline from the escape still pulsed through her veins, but the text on her phone weighed heavily on her mind. She read it again, the words almost mocking her. Asterisk, "You think it's over. This goes deeper than you realize." Asterisk. What did it mean? How far did this operation really reach? Maria couldn't shake the feeling that her escape, while significant, had only scratched the surface of something much larger. She gripped her phone tightly. The footage and audio recordings she'd captured her only assurance that she wasn't losing her mind. The pilot, a kind-looking older man with weathered features, glanced back at her. "You okay back there?" Maria forced a weak smile and nodded. "Thanks for helping me. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't let me on." He nodded, his expression serious. "I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but it's clear you've got something important to do. This flight will get you to a regional airstrip about an hour from here. From there, you're on your own." Maria thanked him again and turned her attention back to her phone. She quickly forwarded the files to Alex with a message. "I have everything. This is bigger than we thought. I'll call you as soon as I land." The hour-long flight felt like an eternity, her mind cycling through every moment of the night. Harris' warning, Daniel's fury, the underground operation. It was all connected, but she didn't have the full picture. For now, her priority was making sure the evidence reached someone who could do something about it. When the plane touched down at the small airstrip, Maria thanked the pilot and hurried off. The night air was crisp, and the faint glow of dawn was just starting to appear on the horizon. She found a quiet spot near the terminal building and called Alex. He answered on the first ring. "Maria, are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm safe," she said, her voice shaky. "I escaped, but barely. Alex, this is bigger than we imagined. They're smuggling something through the airport, and it's massive. I don't know what's in those crates, but it's enough to have people willing to kill to protect it." Alex's voice was calm but firm. "You did the right thing getting out of there. I'm already reviewing the files you sent me. This is explosive, Maria. We need to get this to the authorities immediately." Maria hesitated. "Do you think we can trust them? If this operation is as big as it seems, there's no telling how far it goes or who's involved." Alex was silent for a moment. "You're right. We have to be careful. Let me reach out to a few trusted contacts. In the meantime, lay low and stay safe. I'll call you as soon as I have a plan." Maria ended the call and leaned against the side of the terminal building, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She closed her eyes, replaying the events of the night over and over in her mind. By the time Alex called back, the sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the small airstrip. Maria answered quickly, her nerves on edge. "I got a contact in the investigative bureau," Alex said. "Someone I trust completely. They'll take the evidence and start an official investigation. But Maria, you need to come with me to deliver it. Your first-hand account will be crucial." Maria agreed, and within a few hours, Alex arrived at the airstrip to pick her up. He looked tired but determined, his usual confidence tempered by the weight of the situation. Together, they drove to a secure location where Alex's contact was waiting.